From the year 2000 to 2014, over 4,000 games were released on the PlayStation 2. Widely considered as one if not the most popular console ever released, it gave birth to an amazing library of games, spanning through genres with many classics, underrated gems, shovelware, and strange and forgotten titles. My goal here is to play and review each and every single game released on the console in a somewhat chronological manner, creating the ultimate retrospective of my favorite video game console. There are going to be a few rules in place. Number 1, only the original release date will be taken into account. Number 2, even if the game released on other platforms, we'll only review the PS2 versions. Number 3, games that are very similar will sometimes be combined into a single video, even if their release date is a few months apart. Number 4, and lastly, I unfortunately can't read Japanese, so games that weren't translated in English and where you need to understand the language to play won't be reviewed, but only mentioned. Will we succeed at covering it all? Probably not. But we won't find out until we deep dive into our very next game. Welcome to PS2 UR, the PlayStation 2 Ultimate Retrospective. From the very beginning of Sony's first venture into console manufacturing, Namco was always here to provide a significant amount of quality titles, helping out the PlayStation into becoming the powerhouse that it was back then. Anyone who grew up with a PS1 knows about Tekken, Ace Combat, Time Crisis, and of course, while popular in the arcades, the Ridge Racer series truly thrived on Sony's console and became an instant classic, starting out as a launch title and continuing with 3 other sequels, each time getting better as they went on. With Namco being such a close associate with Sony, it was fairly obvious that they would release at least one launch title. And what better way to launch out the PS2 than with a brand new Ridge Racer game? So, just a quick warning before we start, this is the first Ridge Racer game I've ever played. As a matter of fact, I've never really been a fan of racing games in general. I'm quite bad at them, so if you see gameplay footage where I'm being terrible at the game, it's because I'm terrible at the game. Now that's out of the way, let's talk about the game itself. As usual at this point, Ridge Racer 5 is a launch title released in all regions. Just like the very first Ridge Racer, 5 is an arcade-style racing game, although in this case the console release came before the arcade, hitting the big machines under the title Ridge Racer 5 Arcade Battle a year later. Mirroring the first Ridge Racer once again, 5 aimed to be a technological display of what this next-gen hardware was capable of, showing off what this era of gaming was all about. Big cars and attractive women, of course. Acting more like a tech demo rather than a fully fleshed out experience, 5 returns to the basics, with fewer cars, trucks, and modes than the previous installment. Just as the opening writes boldly, this is a new beginning. Not just for the Ridge Racer franchise or even in gaming, but in pop culture in general. The year 2000 obviously marks the end of the 20th century, which ended with a decade of technological innovations, striking fashion trends, heavy experimentations, and highly influential media that are still relevant to this day. At least that's how that decade feels from an outsider of that period. I grew up in the 2000s, so I never really experienced how the 90s were. The 2000s, on the other hand, were marked through the democratization of the internet, the amplifications of communication methods, and unfortunately numerous tragedies, thus largely affecting media produced in the subsequent decade, manifesting with all-around darker and drearier tones. The exact time of March 2000 is a strange one, It's positioned in between the end of the 90s and before most of the major events that really shaped the decade, keeping realistic visuals and unsaturated color schemes with a light and chill tone, kinda like a mix between the best both periods could give at the time. Playing the game is a vibe in itself, and it's quite a mesmerizing sensation. Racing through dense cities, welcoming coasts, or vibrant beaches just feels relaxing. I can't say that I had the best first impression of it though. I wasn't able to complete the very first race, or even ranking higher than 8th place for that matter. The car's handling felt too heavy, and drifting failed most of the time. Eventually I gave up and decided to lower the difficulty. Now I was still terrible at the game, but I could finally win the first race and continue through. Thankfully, my atrocious skills largely improved as it went on. Playing on easy mode was the perfect way to get acquainted with the gameplay. It's casual enough that you'll probably win the races on your first try, while the AI is still good enough to be a threat. Speaking of which, Ridge Racer 5 is mainly composed of 6 GPs. The Standard Cup for beginners, where you'll be using basic cars, 4 different extra cups with different names depending on the difficulty. Here I'll use the one from easy mode. Heroic GP is a basic circuit that uses upgraded cars, just like the other extra cups. Blast GP has a timer that can cause instant elimination. Night GP takes place in reversed versions of existing tracks. And Throne GP is a single race on a 10-lap track. Lastly, the Ultimate GP is only available on the hardest difficulty, consisting of a basic circuit with 5-lap races, instead of the usual 3. Other than the Grand Prix mode, you also have the typical time trial and free play modes. Although you need to unlock a card to play those modes in the first place. Cars are unlocked after completing the standard GP with it, so if you want to unlock multiple cars, you'll need to play through the first cup multiple times. Thus, you'll most likely only play with a single car throughout the game. That also means you won't even be able to practice the game without having already completed the first cup, which appears to be an oversight from the developers. Long after my rookie beginning into Ridge Racer 5, the frustration I first had changed into a delight. Controlling my car became natural. I was eventually able to execute some tight drifts, and racing got completely addictive. Out of sheer curiosity though, I wanted to look into at least 2 previous Ridge Racer games, just to observe how the series evolved. I quickly set on looking into the first PS1 title alongside Ridge Racer Type 4. Obviously I was very curious about the first installment, wanting to get a swift look into the origin of the series. Ridge Racer is a very basic game, with only one track with different variations of it. And funnily enough, a remake of that same track is also present in the 5th game. Controls are what you would expect, leaning more into an arcade-ish feel rather than the heavier handling of 5. There isn't a whole lot to say about that game, really. It's a fun time wester, but a bit outdated. Conversely, I also wanted to get a glimpse of the most popular game of the franchise, R4 Ridge Racer Type 4. What a great name, by the way. Let's get it out of the way immediately. Type 4 is a way better game. No debate here. The evolution from the first to the 4th game is astounding, really. There's a world of difference, from the very utilitarian visuals of the 1993 arcade release, to the more sleek and stylized look of the 1998 PS1 installment. The racing is more fluid, tracks more varied, the soundtrack is exceedingly catchy, and it has overall more content. I roughly played through the Japanese team story mode all the way through, and it was a blast from beginning to end. Going back into the 5th game after that felt awkward to say the least. Vehicles now struck as heavy, unresponsive, unstable. I really needed a few good minutes to adapt once again into the controls. It was still good, but not as good as the previous entry. Just for fun, I played through the time trial and duel modes to unlock more content. Eventually I went back into the normal difficulty mode to finally get my revenge. I managed to successfully win this time, but not without struggling way more than I did during my entire playthrough of R4. Now I can pat myself on the back for not being a completely terrible racer. Well, I'm still terrible, but not as much at least. This game is an amazing launch title. I know I called Tekken in my second video the best PS2 launch game, and to a certain extent I still do consider it to be the case. But Ridge Racer 5 is a close second. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you would consider it to be the best launch title. The game looks, sounds and plays great through and through, despite some shortcomings, mostly the hard difficulty and lack of content. RR5 reintroduced perfectly the Ridge Racer franchise into a new era. Hopefully the next PS2 entry will be capable of fusing the more modern looks of the 5th game with the content and feel of the 4th. What's that? Namco never released another entry on the PS2. Oh well. At least the PSP games are great apparently. That's gonna be all for today's episode. I hope to see you in the next one. Like and subscribe if you don't want to miss out on upcoming videos. See you soon and take care.